Hello again. I said hello again. Hello. Thank you. Okay, so resilience. Okay. Hi. So nice to see you all.
Nice to see you.
So resilience. I want to go back to the science for a second. We really touched on this very briefly earlier. Resilience is not a goal in and of itself, right? It's, excuse me, I scarfed down a banana before I got up here. It is a characteristic of a healthy, complex system. And there's something called, in nature, there's something called the window of vitality. Sounds like something from I don't know, Lord of the Rings or something. But the window of vitality, essentially, if you think of an axis, all right, on one end you have resilience, on the other end you have efficiency. And in between those things is essentially a bell curve, all right? And when you have something that's very, very efficient, it tends not to be very resilient. And when you have something that's very, very resilient, it tends not to be very efficient. So one example is behind me, or actually all around the room. On the top, you have a swamp. A swamp is one of the most resilient ecosystems in existence. It's very difficult to destroy a swamp, right? If there is an acute event, so there's no forest fire in a swamp like this. That's really not about to happen. Torrential rain will not destroy the swamp. You know, different events will not impact the swamp. On the other end of the spectrum, you have monocrop. What's a monocrop? Everyone said corn. Monocrop is essentially a crop with one type of yield. Thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. And especially in non-organic crops where every single, for example, wheat, if you're dealing with non-organic wheat, every single grain of wheat has essentially the same DNA structure. So if there is an illness in the crop, if one little grain of wheat has some sort of problem with it, it will spread and the crop in its entirety will likely not be viable. And somewhere in between is what's called the window of vitality. There's a balance between resilience and efficiency, and that's where humans thrive. Humans thrive somewhere in the middle there, where we are really living in synchronicity with our environment, our food systems, permaculture, for those of you who are familiar. That's kind of a resilient and efficient system where you have a certain amount of productivity, but you don't have waste, where you have resilience in the sense that if one of the types of produce does not work out, you know, what impacts wheat will not impact an apple tree, right? So you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So that's just a scientific perspective on resilience and efficiency. You can go back to the slide with the names on it if you want, because I've said enough. Anyway, during the next, I think we have about 45 minutes, maybe a little more. We have till noon. We're going to be talking about what resilience looks like in community. I would say even not only within amongst people, because Colleen anyway lives inside the New York City watershed, which is a totally different level of, you know, our role in nature and what that looks like. Before we dive in, I'll give everyone a couple minutes to just introduce yourselves, what you're doing here, why you agreed to this. And then we'll take it from there. Corey, you want to go first?
Huh?
You want to go first? Introduce yourself?
Ladies first. I'm old school.
Corey's shy. Okay, Colleen?
Please.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Okay. Hi, I'm Colleen. I'm the executive director at the Pine Hill Community Center. I think, like the conversations about Ellenville, you may not, I would guess most of you don't know where Pine Hill is. Oh, you do? Okay, great. I love when we raise hands, so I know. Okay, great. Oftentimes people are like, I know Pine Hill. It's up by Catskill. I'm like, no, that's Pine Bush. We are Pine Hill. We are this big. We are a hamlet in the town of Shandaken in the westernmost part of Ulster County. We have just under 300 folks living in the hamlet now, and just under 3,000 folks living in the town. You may have heard of the Phoenicia Farmers Market. They are part of Shandaken. There are, oh goodness, I'm looking at Giese to think about how many hamlets are actually in there. I think we grapple between, there's 12. Some people will say 11, but there's 12. So my role at the community center is to cultivate connection and opportunity for folks that live in the hamlet and in the town and the larger community. We provide programming, we provide wellness classes and education classes. We have a pottery studio. We just try to keep people busy and try to remind them that despite our geographic remoteness, that we are connected and that we can socialize in this small little space that used to be a mechanic's garage and an eyeglass factory, and in the year 2000 was donated to the board to run. We started out paying, I think, $1 for rent, and now we pay nothing. We own the building, and it started out after an 11-year-old suffered a tragic loss, took his own life after his parents were struggling with substance abuse, and the community needed a space to grieve and to come together and move forward. So speaking of resiliency, that's exactly what we did 25 years ago, and we're still going at it. So, but I'm not sure that I'm here today because of the community center or because of this group that came from the community itself and is housed in the nonpartisan, very welcoming environment of the community center. This group is called PH2, and PH2 because it is mostly Pine Hill and Phoenicia folks that have come together and created this very creative name. And we've come together as a group that not focusing on politics, but doing the work that the town itself doesn't have the capacity to do over every month, every 6-week potluck. So we bring food together, we bring ideas together, and we've become this community action incubator. So we are, I think, building resiliency through the work that we're doing. I think we are holding on tight to that connectedness through each other, and kind of combating the isolation that we face in our remote space. So.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rebekkah Smith Aldrich. I have the coolest job ever. I'm the executive director of the Mid-Hudson Library System. Yeah, who's got their library card?
I brought my librarian.
Come on. All right, nice. The librarians are here from Pine Hill, which is great, Giese. So I work with a cooperative of 66 public libraries throughout the Hudson Valley, all of Columbia County, Greene County, Dutchess County, and Putnam County, and almost all of Ulster. 4 libraries defected in the 1950s. They thought it was easier to drive to Middletown than Poughkeepsie, but we're not bitter. That's all right. But we have a very interesting life together. We've created community for 65 years and sharing amongst institutions that are known for sharing. So you may think of books when you think of libraries, and I'm going to just school you all. We're really not actually about books. We're educational institutions, and what you find in those books are stories about lived experiences and information and facts that help us interpret the world around us. And libraries have really evolved in the past few decades to recognize that people learn in different ways. So when you walk into a library today, yeah, you're going to find the books, but also technology and programs and people hanging out and knitting on the front yard. And it's really a catalyst of social cohesion in almost every community across the Hudson Valley, which is really, really powerful. So it's an amazing network of information professionals, which are located in just about every town and village across the Hudson Valley. And they provide really critical social infrastructure, which is something that was cited in the Surgeon General's report that was mentioned earlier this morning on the epidemic of loneliness throughout the country. Social infrastructure really creates those nonpartisan, non-commercialized spaces for folks to come and just be together, be neighbors together, without expectation of the exchange of funds or the commercialization of services they're accessing in those spaces. So each little library across the country, really at this point, reflects the needs of their particular community, and that's no different here in the Hudson Valley. So in the Hudson Valley, each library is independent. They listen to their community, what they need, and they shape their services, programs, collections, partnerships to reflect the needs of that community. And then as a cooperative, we find ways to save money, to work together, to extrapolate knowledge and accelerate library advancements by sharing knowledge and information amongst ourselves for the betterment of the folks of the Hudson Valley. And then I have a side project, because I don't sleep a lot. It's called the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which is an international program helping libraries operationalize in a much higher gear the idea of how libraries contribute to community resilience. So really thinking about not only the kind of fear factor of climate change and how to embrace the idea that libraries should be leaders in authentic ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and work on climate adaptation with municipal and campus leaders, but really focusing on what we feel is the secret ingredient to all of this, which is the justice aspect of this, and making sure that we are supercharging, increasing respect, empathy, and understanding amongst neighbors so they can actually come together and solve the problems of the day. So I think that might be why I'm here today.
Hello, everybody. My name is J.Allen. I work for Habitat for Humanity of Greater Newburgh. I'm a lifelong Newburgh resident, and I'm here because Elka told me to show up. And my job at Habitat Newburgh, I'm the Neighborhood Revitalization Specialist. Does anyone know what the word revitalization means? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, I'm going to give you my definition of it. Without even asking, I'm going to tell you the truth. Revitalization, in my opinion, is the opposite of gentrification. Gentrification is a phrase. If anyone tells you gentrification is good, they're stupid. Look them in their face and tell them they're stupid. Ruth Glass is a German sociologist in 1964, was downtown in London, and she noticed that the black neighborhoods, similar to over here, had been overrun with systemically racist policy, and that they had been under-resourced. That's another R word I'm going to use for today, resource. And she realized that in these neighborhoods that had been under-resourced, that folks from the middle class to upper middle class would come and buy into these neighborhoods. Those folks were called the gentry class, hence the word gentrification. She would see one gentry person move to the neighborhood and fix up the home, and see the other folks, it would attract other gentry, and that would, make the neighborhood look good, but then you look around and see that the folks that were there weren't there anymore. Revitalization, I believe, is the opposite of gentrification. James Brown has a song called "I Don't Want Nobody to Give Me Nothing, Just Open Up the Door and I'll Get It Myself." Revitalization is putting the resources in the hands of the people that are there, so they and for the purpose of them being able to stay there. Now, again, being a lifelong Newburgher, I've seen both gentrification and revitalization. I'm seeing more of the former than the latter. A lot more of it. I'm seeing neighborhoods where I'm seeing folks I've never seen before. No offense to anyone out there, a bunch of Subarus now. That seems to be the choice car of...
I'm personally insulted. The queers in the room are...
Apologies if you drive a Subaru. It is what it is. So seems to be the choice car of the folks that are moving into these black neighborhoods. And it's become quite a large problem. I've seen study after 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 study about the problems in Newburgh and what the solutions are, but I don't see the policy to get those solutions in place. So I guess I'm here because I love Newburgh. I love environmental work. I serve on a couple of environmental boards. There's money coming down the pike from the governor for a bunch of environmental initiatives coming around the country, out through the state rather. But I want to make sure that the folks that look like me get jobs in these areas, because I keep hearing, in these studies, I keep hearing about, disproportionate this and disproportionate that, and entry into this field here. So I just want to make sure that when things come to Newburgh, the resources come to Newburgh, that they're equally distributed, so we can revitalize it properly.
So I live in Newburgh. Corey and I have worked together on a number of projects. Unfortunately, Rebekkah, we haven't worked together yet, but I think we most likely will. And Colleen, Kate Stryker, my colleague, and I are working on the Shandaken Comprehensive Plan right now, so I'm deeply familiar with the PH2 work, and it's really phenomenal. I think there are a few topics that are kind of bubbling up for me right now. And the one that I think I would like to start with is that all of you are essentially filling a role that government ought to. And I want to pick up on something that was, that Joe shared, that, the politician who wanted to take credit for the healthcare. Libraries nowadays kind of function as social service organizations, especially with a massive, defunding of psychiatric care. Corey, what you're talking about is essentially, responding to hundreds of years of racist, racialized policies that have impacted wealth distribution and land access. And Colleen, you're doing something very, very similar where you are in a different capacity. You're, the town, because you're only, 5,000 people in the town of Shandaken? So
I think under 3,000.
Under 3,000. Wow, I should know that because I'm supposed to know the population data. And so you're kind of stepping in lieu of a government that has enough capacity. And so I want to talk about the relationship between government and community a little bit, and what government can't do, will never do, what they can do, how you navigate those systems, where there are blockages in the system that are imposed by government that you would like to see broken down. Who wants to start?
Seems like Rebekkah. She grabbed the mic.
Carrie's here. I'm going to go first. I'll do it. One of the interesting things about libraries in New York State, because New York is New York, they're overly complicated from a government structure point of view. Like 4 different types of public libraries, and there are different governance structures, funding structures. And so for 26 years, a big part of my job has been seeking sustainable funding for our libraries, which means a direct relationship with voters. So taking it out of the hands of municipal leaders who have a lot of priorities they're trying to satisfy across the municipality, and really focus on what the people need from libraries, so that they are of the people, by the people, for the people. So they are governed by local boards, they are funded by local taxpayers, and almost every single year, voters are voting to tax themselves for library services. And in the Mid-Hudson library system, we have a 97% passage rate for those budget votes over the past 30 years. So people love their libraries in the Hudson Valley. And as distressing as Election Day was, when you look at the results at the Board of Elections for each of our counties, you're going to see every single library referendum passed on Election Day. So as much as we've been, they've tried to drag us into what we call the culture wars of the past 4, 5, 10 years, it seems longer at this point, what we're still seeing is nonpartisan support for libraries, because we are for everyone. And so the fact is we are funded by property tax dollars. 85% of my budget comes from New York State, but the local control issue is really, really important and needs to be respected over time so that we can be what the people need. To Elka's point earlier about us becoming the social safety net over time, and particularly the past 5 years since COVID, it's just been accelerated. The food insecurity issues landed on our front doorstep. Literally, Giesi's here from the Pine Hill Library, the Morton Memorial Library in Pine Hill. I believe you bought a refrigerator and put it on the front porch of the library during COVID because folks were in such need, and working with CSAs and other farmers and just getting the food into the hands of the folks that needed it. The libraries were an accelerator in that moment of need. We saw the same thing in COVID with access to the internet, which should be ubiquitous. It should be a utility, but instead we had teachers teaching out of our parking lots. I have this amazing picture of a teacher with her trunk open in her Toyota Corolla trying to teach a class on her laptop balance connected to the library's Wi-Fi. We are better than that. We deserve better than that. So we focused very hard in the past 3 years to really focus on digital equity, because every kid deserves broadband access to the internet to do well at school, and to really access social services these days, you have to be digitally literate. And libraries are the #1 spot. People are going to figure out how to use the internet, how to navigate it. And really, let's talk about, honestly, the biggest issue on the shelf right now is combating disinformation and misinformation in our communities. Libraries are one of the most trusted institutions, despite the lack of trust for government in this moment. 87% of millennials trust public librarians. 74% of baby boomers trust librarians. Take that for what you will. But I think that's an incredibly important asset to every community, a place that is fighting for you every day, regardless of what your goal is. Libraries are for everyone, and that's a level of flexibility most government agencies do not have. We don't think of ourselves as government agencies, but we do our best to leverage government and tax money on behalf of the people that we serve. So maintaining independence, but with the local input, has been a real hallmark, I think, of libraries in the Hudson Valley. And so I think government has its purposes, but without the people involved in how you make decisions about your money, your communities, your institutions, it slowly gets further and further away from what you actually need it to be. So that's been incredibly important for us.
How does the government prevent me from doing our job? Us in housing? Oh, and I can tell you how the government prevents housing. What could they be doing? What could the government not do? That should be the question. In all honesty, I saw recently. I tell people all the time that legislators are representative. It's representative government. I was taught that in 11th grade. My teacher, Mr. Ferguson, one of my favorite teachers ever, told us it's representative government. So at every level, they're supposed to advocate for you. So it's like I asked the question, what can't they do? I just saw personally a $24 million sewage project in Newburgh get completed. How do we get the money for that? They tell us we don't have any money for jobs, but they have money for the sewage projects. We have money coming in during COVID, when COVID shut down. I'm glad you said that. Government came together. Everybody came together. Bipartisan came together and came up with all types of money. When I was told in 2008, the banks, too big to fail. What happened? Government came together, came up with money. I believe that, the government is standing in the way of its own self. When you look at what's needed, every year I go to D.C. for Habitat with Habitat International. We call it Habitat on the Hill. Everybody we visit, we're asking for appropriations, money. The people that regulate the money, the people that make the money are the ones that control everything. So when there's a problem, like a doctor, they can diagnose. They can clearly look at a problem in a certain area and say, these folks here need resources. These folks here need housing. The money should be dispersed where it needs to be. There's a man named Neely Fuller Jr. He is a man I follow. He says his definition of justice is making sure that no one anywhere is mistreated and the folks that need help the most receive the most help. That's what the government needs to do. They need to encourage justice. And money.
I'll second money. No. I actually want to take a word that came up twice in Rebekkah's spiel, and the word is leverage. I think what is happening at Pine Hill Community Center through the PH2 group is we understand that because of our size, our local government doesn't have the capacity, and I think we're in a space where we know that larger government doesn't see us, literally doesn't see us, but also don't even get me started. They definitely don't know where Pine Hill exists. So I think what we are trying to do as a small group of really engaged, overly committed volunteers in our community, which can range from 30 to 50 people on a Monday night in Pine Hill, breaking bread and eating food together. I think we are leveraging what our local government can't do, and we are, as volunteers, are taking that on. I think we've seen folks like, I'm gonna name drop because she couldn't be here today, but Sophie Grant, who created the Phoenicia Farmers Market, saw a need during COVID that people didn't have fresh food, they didn't have access, and she created that access. She is a part of PH2, and along with Geesey, our librarian, they managed to get food to people that needed it. We've used our space and our collective minds to to leverage. I think we are taking the needs that we have and actually doing that community assessment. We have the folks on the ground saying this is a need that we have, and our local government can't meet it, whether it's due to funds, whether it's due to just not being able to get a vote through. And we're putting the folks on the ground, those volunteers, into local government. Sophie is now on a housing committee. We had a housing fair that brought in, I think, 80 to 100 people in a very small town on a Tuesday night, and tried to match them with their housing needs. So I think we're taking the work that we're not seeing be done, and maybe burning out some volunteers, but it's a labor of love, and I think we're there we are becoming that government that we need to see. So.
If I could just add in, Elka had mentioned the increase and lack of support for folks with mental illness and substance abuse issues, and that is something we are seeing I would love to say that it's all kumbaya at the library, but we are seeing some really unfortunate things in terms of being on the front lines of our communities, because folks literally have no place else to go. When we looked at the extended heat waves over the summer, most of our libraries were the only cooling centers in 75% of the towns across the Hudson Valley. And that's just a microcosm of every day for libraries who are providing frontline support for something they were never trained to do. So our library workers are now asked to be Jacks and Jills of all trades, trying to help someone figure out how to connect with social services, how to connect with the programs that are there, what funds have trickled into these communities, how do you actually access those services? And so in many ways, I think organizations like the three of us are running are to decode government for people, so you can actually get to the programs that are there. They're incredibly complicated in many ways. I myself am trying to apply for money to offset costs of solar panels on my office building. I have never felt so ignorant in my life. It should be so straightforward to fill this form out. I filled out 3 forms. I had to take I spent 3 hours on it the other day, and I still am no further along than I should be. But when you think about someone who is not digitally literate, who's not used to being online, who really isn't used to filling out forms online, we are keeping people from the very services we have all voted in for them. And so I think that's another incredibly important role many of the people that you'll see on the stage today are doing, which is breaking down the barrier so people can access services that are waiting there for them.
And to piggyback off of what you said, I want to say thank you too for in the city of Newburgh, the libraries are like probably the main place where the homeless go. Everybody, for our homeless shelters sometimes have a time limit, and they let people out. People have to leave, and they have to come back at a certain time. So where do? They go to the library. Last summer, for the last 2-3 summers, Newburgh has not had a public pool. Our public pool had some problems, and it's getting rebuilt. And again, government was able to get money, $10 million to fix the public pool, and it's going to be fixed this summer. But basically, just to piggyback off what you said and the work that you guys do, it's necessary to know who's who in your area. People call Habitat all the time. They don't know what we do. We build houses, but they call us, and we have to oftentimes be social workers. Sometimes I'll have people call other agencies. They won't get the help they need. Other agencies will look at them as less than, and they'll never get the help they need, and it discourages them. So then what they'll do is call me back, and we'll call together. And if I say, hey, I'm J.Allen from Habitat for Humanity of Greater Newburgh, I have someone on the phone with me, I'm trying to help, that's when they get the help they need. So I believe that, the social work that the folks up here on this stage do, it's from a place of being empathetic, being able to understand who you're working with, where that person's coming from. So whatever you do in life, try your hardest to understand put yourself in that person's shoes for about a second, and that'll help you get your work done a lot better.
Thank you. So one role that government has, I believe, that it is not fulfilling is to ensure that everyone has a roof over their heads. And I want to talk about why that is, just for maybe a minute, and then dive in a little bit, Corey, with you and with the rest of you about the G word that keeps coming up. I think people want answers, right? So We had our Pattern hosted our housing conference, our annual housing conference recently. I don't know if any of you were there. Was anyone there? Yeah, some people were there. Yeah. Okay, I recognize some faces. We had a speaker named George McCarthy, goes by Mac. He's the director of the Lincoln Institute on Land Policy. And he shared an idea that I found really, really helpful. So housing is operating under within two separate markets, right? There are two separate housing markets. One of them is for basic shelter, right? That's a necessity. The other is investment, which is a commodity, right? So a commodity is anything that you don't really necessarily need to live, okay? So diamonds, gold, oil. I said it. There I go. And a necessity is, shelter, a roof over your head, everything we talked about earlier, what human beings need to thrive, right? That well-being framework. There are needs. Those are not commodities. They're necessities. The problem is that both of those housing markets, shelter and investment, are only operating within an investment framework, right? So what that means is that there are dramatic fluctuations, just like the stock market, right, in housing. The housing market essentially operates just like any other stock. That's a problem when we need stability, right? It's a problem. So let's talk for just a second about gentrification. Corey mentioned this. Gentrification comes from the word gentry. Thank you. You're not asleep yet. Or too hungry to focus. So the entry of the gentry. What does the gentry mean? Privileged. People with good social status. That's, I think, the going definition. And what does it mean to have good social status? Money, right? History, right? Some sort of sense of legacy, right? A head start. Education. Access to power. Exclusive connections. Now, I don't necessarily think, sorry? Privilege, yeah. And that privilege is both social and economic. Okay. So when we have wealth disparities, when we have a system that funnels wealth from the bottom of the system to the top, right? When we have pooling of wealth, what ends up happening is there is the manifestation of that in the physical realm is within the housing market, right? If you can't afford to participate in the housing market, you don't have a roof over your head. And so when you have lower income neighborhoods, often wealthier individuals will not enter those neighborhoods until there's some sort of something that they can recognize as something that is of value. Again, this is not, I'm a gentrifier. I mean, I moved to Newburgh in 2019, okay? I'm a gentrifier. I personally was looking for community that I felt safe and comfortable in. I like to live in diverse communities. I like there to be a coffee shop where I can order a flat white and people know what I'm talking about, okay? I'm a gentrifier. The thing is that as that happens, the housing market responds and becomes more valuable, okay? And so that investment market kicks in, right? And goes higher and higher and higher. And the shelter market is not being cared for. We're not providing within the shelter market. So that's essentially what happens with gentrification. There's a science to it, all right? Now, the question then is, how do we provide for that shelter market that is so crucial to the well-being of our communities, and to make sure that the things that brought us to a place in the first place are able to stay and thrive, right? Is that agreed? Any qualms with that? What? What did I say? That whole thing? Oh, the question. How do we provide for the shelter market? How do we address the shelter market of necessity within an environment that is oriented towards the housing market as an investment and a commodity? Okay? Now, Habitat is one such model, so I'd like to give Corey an opportunity to answer first.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. What could be done? To be honest with you, I feel in many places it's way too late. It's much too late. We have, soon coming up the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the country from baby boomers to Gen Xers. We have quantitative easing happening every 5 to 6 years. That gives folks a boost, those involved in the stock market, widening the racial wealth gap. And then you have all these laws in the past, that have, decimated neighborhoods, and that things haven't been reversed. We haven't tended to those problems yet. So I think oftentimes, we look at certain areas, it may be too late. I look at Hudson, New York, too late. Beacon, New York, too late. And it all comes down, I believe it comes down to true, effective urban planning. If you are not planning for folks to stay, you're planning for them to leave. So you're planning for those investors to come. You're okay with those investors coming in and you selling property to them. You're okay with the folks coming from New York City to open up the restaurants, live their hopes and dreams right in the middle of a black neighborhood where the folks can't afford the food. You're okay with that. So I think it's too late in some places. In other places, I believe the real solution is to do the exact opposite of what happened to make it messed up in the first place. If it was messed over by policy, there needs to be policy that indemnifies the folks that are affected by policy. And I don't think there's enough of that going around. I don't think people are focusing on that. We focus on, hey, let's move on. But no, let's heal first, make these folks whole, give them the resources they need, open that door up like James Brown said so they can get themselves. Give them the resources they need or access to the resources they need so they can fix up their own communities. But instead, governments, they ask for outside investors. Come up here in Newburgh where it's cheap. Come to Harlem where Columbia University sat on buildings for years and years. Come to New York City. Come up here. Come to the gem of the Hudson, Newburgh, New York, where urban renewal took place. Come up here. And that's what I think needs to be done. If we want to talk true solutions, we got to look at what happened. The cancer that was caused. Again, I tell people this all the time. I don't like the word BIPOC. Don't use it around me because you might get cussed out. I'm going to cuss you out. Because what it does is I think the word BIPOC takes a whole bunch of people and it shoehorns them, crowbars them into the same space. My mother in 2001 was diagnosed with pre-stage 1 breast cancer. The doctor said, we're going to give her a treatment. We're going to treat her. We're going to remove part of her left breast and give her a localized, which means we're going to focus on that one part of that breast, localized radiation treatment, and tamoxifen, which is a pro-remission drug that she took. Fast forward to 2012, she was diagnosed with stage 4 stomach cancer. The treatment for stomach cancer wasn't, hey, we're going to remove another part of your left breast, give you a localized radiation treatment, and tamoxifen. No. They looked at the problem she had and diagnosed it and treated it accordingly. We have to be, whenever we go out into the public, everybody who works in housing, banking, whatever realm you work in, whatever sector you're in, you have to be as if a doctor. Understand what the folks that you're working with or have gone through. I hear the word community all the time. I hear community. I'm not going to lie to you. Sometimes I get sick when I hear that. But if you're going to work with the community, don't be scared. Go into the community, figure out what they need. Learn the history. Learn what got them to where they are. And then you can learn from then, go from then to learn what solutions should be applied. But each community is different, and it's up to you to diagnose that.
Yeah, Colleen, I'm looking at you because I know that Shandaken has both relies on tourism and struggles with a housing crisis, real. Different and related, right? And there is quite a bit of poverty in your community as well. And I want to just touch on what it means to be a steward, both of the land and your community within that context. And if you want to relate to anything Corey said in the previous question, absolutely.
Well, in a very small way, think that Pine Hill can relate to everything that Corey just said. So I'm going to take you on a tiny tangent. Every Monday night at the community center, we have something called the recovery room. And it is an open meeting for anyone struggling with any kind of addiction. It could be a shopping addiction. It could be an alcohol addiction. It can be someone who's in recovery and just needs that support. It is just a support group. And the man who runs it, his name is Michael Reishman, is there every single night, or every single Monday night, regardless of what's going on, regardless of holidays. He will be there tonight. And there are weeks where the pizza truck is in the town over. No one's come to recovery room, but Michael still shows up. And one night I asked him, I was like, do you still want to do it next week, or do you want to shift the hours for the summer because everyone's got busy schedules? And he said, Colleen, if one person shows up, I was supposed, like, that person needed me. So I need to be here for that one person, because they showed up because they needed someone to talk to. They needed that support. So I feel the same way about housing. I think when we get, like Corey was saying, if we can get one person to come and tell us what they need in terms of housing, and we can, even if we sit and focus on that one person, and I've done it many times. I've played the social worker card where I'm going to call every shelter. I'm going to take my day that I'm supposed to be writing a grant, and I'm going to sit down with this person and find them some shelter for the night. That made a difference in that one person. So I think we can go even bigger to say that if we can bring these groups in and ask them what their needs are, which we have done. We've done a housing committee who has done a housing fair that invited anyone from landlords to contractors to folks who want to do like intergenerational home shares. You're connecting people, you're connecting a need to a response to that need, a need to a solution. Pine Hill is absolutely in a housing crisis. If you asked my parents, I'm born and raised in Delaware County, so just over the border from Ulster. My father was born and raised there. My mother was born and raised in Westchester and will still be called the city girl by all my father's friends. But when my parents were growing up there, my mother was a 22-year-old teacher who moved up from Westchester, and they used to talk about how Pine Hill was this booming metropolis. It was like the hot spot to be. That's where they went to the bars. That's where they went out dancing. That's where they met. And now it has, since I have become an adult, if we can call myself that, it has always fallen into a low-income census tract. As of 2 years ago, just depths of the pandemic, we were no longer in the low-income census tract. So for me to write a grant saying we were, I had to really spin it and say we've been pushed out of that because folks are moving up from the city, buying either second homes so they can ski there, because we are literally 1 mile from the ski mountain, from Bel Air Ski Slope. So they're there for the winter, renting their ski home, or they are buying their second home for whenever, or they've completely relocated there and they're living in a 6-bedroom house with their partner. It is absolutely pushing locals out. It is absolutely making it difficult for people to live. But I think something that PH2 is doing is they are starting to address those needs with the people who have also moved into those homes. We're trying to include everyone in the process. It's a space for everyone. I think we can blame those folks that are buying those massive homes for them and their partner, or we can use them as part of the solution. So we can say, great, you have this house. We have this couple that they really need somewhere to live. Maybe it's temporary, maybe it's long-term, but you have this massive space. Is there a way that we can find some funding, or is there a way that we can find someone to support breaking that house into 2 different apartments? Or are you open to intergenerational living? Are you open to temporary housing? And really, Corey, don't yell at me. But there is community in that. I think using, again, leverage. You have these people that we can either choose to be upset with, or we can use them as part of the solution. So yeah, we are in a housing crisis, But I think the only way out of it is really to lean on each other, or those houses are just going to go vacant for the 6 months that someone's not skiing. So,
Thank you. I'm realizing we are super close to the end of our time. I want to express first a call to action and then open the floor to questions. I think, Colleen, what you just touched upon is really significant. Land and home ownership have been probably the most significant sources of wealth for those who have been able to access it. We will not solve this problem without addressing that root cause. I don't know how many of you have more land than you need. I don't know how many of you have friends who have more land than they need. One of the tools that is in our toolbox is called a community land trust. Has anyone heard of a community land trust before? Yes. A community land trust is essentially community-owned land that is taken out of the investment market, right? We talked about the investment market and the shelter market. The community land trust is a way for the community to decide what happens with that land. That could be affordable housing, that could be community stewarded farming, it could be a variety of things, it could be a library. For those of you who are connected with people who have more land than they need, have these conversations with them. Because I do think that it's a matter of collaboration. It's not a matter of alienation anymore. We're not going to fight that fight and win. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions.
I'm handed a mic, so I'm going to just jump in if that's okay. I'm so glad you just made that point, because the question that's been on my mind during this panel has been around the sort of impossible, like, destined to fail structure of the United States that's so focused on the individual. And when we're focused on the individual, there's no way to undo, it's all too late, I think, because of like the structural problems built into our society here. But I'm curious for the panelists, like, how much are you kind of like considering or aware of cooperative models? Similar to like a community land trust is sort of like a community cooperative model for land, but also like I know, some of the communities on the West Coast that have dealt with this income inequality, like there's construction cooperatives, housing cooperatives. Like, I think that for me, more and more, when I look at the future, I feel like the only way to combat this inequality is to create collectives and to not try to battle it, one individual at a time. It just feels like so daunting. So, there's food co-ops that have amazing success where the food is both the highest quality food and the most affordable. And to me, that's like the model for everything. How much in your work and your communities is this a topic, a way for people to get funding where, a traditional individual mortgage wouldn't be an option, something like that? Like, I know it's not really a popular mainstream avenue in the United States, but it just, to me, feels more and more like what we need to consider. So I'm curious if you have considered or tried working on this topic.
Sounds oddly like socialism. Shh, don't.
We always joke that if we had to create libraries from scratch today, they never would, because they'd be considered socialist, right? That idea of sharing, right? The 66 libraries in our system, they share amongst each other. So you don't just have access to what's in your library, but the library in all 70 of those buildings, including the branches. And then we've extrapolated that model for other small areas of empowerment. So we have a pilot program called the Library of Local in 17 locations that are supercharging climate smart communities. So they're co-located in communities that are going after the climate smart community certification. They all have seed libraries. They all have tool lending libraries. They're looking at special collections that really address some of the issues there. And a lot of them will host programs that many of you in this room are probably very familiar with, called the Repair Cafe or Fix-It clinics. The idea of neighbors teaching neighbors and then empowering each other to take stuff out of the waste stream, to stop being conspicuous consumers, and really modeling on a very small scale what needs to happen on a very large scale, of stop owning everything yourself, stop thinking that you're in competition with your neighbor, share knowledge, share wealth, understand that we're all in this together. And particularly, I'm no no expert in the housing crisis at all. I'm not here to talk about that. I leave that to the experts. But when you think about the scope and scale of many of the major concerns in the Hudson Valley, no one agency is going to be able to address that. We have to combine together and really work towards a collective impact project, but it has to be prioritized. Who's prioritizing it? Corey just made the excellent point that there is plenty of money out there to solve this problem. How are we getting it to the Hudson Valley? Where is the coalition to make that happen? So I think, are we electing folks that prioritize the things that matter to us? Are we finding those coalitions necessary across the Hudson Valley? And are we scaling that good work we know we're capable of here in the Hudson Valley to make good things happen for people?
To add to that, it goes back again to representative government, your officials. In Newburgh, we have what is called the historic district, where back in 1980, after about 7-8 years after black folks got themselves back on their feet after being pushed out of the river, they designated Newburgh a historic district. Basically, that meant if you want to get something fixed on your house, you got to go in front of a board of folks, normally white folks, and ask them for permission and keep things, to the same way they were made, which is oftentimes more expensive. You have things like that going on. You have places like zoning issues in certain areas where the possibility of co-ops being built, won't fit in a certain zone, or it's not zoned for that area. You can't build co-ops here. Sometimes you have different people from different cities and areas who, the NIMBYism, not in my backyard. I'm one of those guys sometimes. I'm not gonna lie to you, not in my backyard because it's my backyard. But at the end of the day, newer models of homes and housing complexes, and you have to have government has to be all in and never and be on the side of the people that are building and remove hurdles as opposed to building them. There's something called the Fair Cloth Act, right? That limits how many housing authorities how many units housing authorities could build. It hasn't been changed since the 90s. So we have a whole housing crisis, but the laws are the same. The same prohibitive laws are in existence right now. No one's advocating for changing them. And then we keep talking about, money. Money is the answer. Appropriations, resources. It has to go towards the people in those projects. And lastly, people got to keep it at 1,000. Got to keep it real when it comes to these projects. I hear all the time in Newburgh, we're coming in with it's going to be affordable housing, or it's workforce affordable. You look up the word workforce affordable is for police officers, firefighters, teachers, college professors, and the folks that live in Newburgh can't afford it still. So they're saying it's affordable, under the guise, they're lying to us. So we have to have a really honest and open discussions about what's really going on.
Thanks, Corey. There is a question up here. I think, can we ask both questions and then answer them both at once? Is that a possibility? Yeah. You want to go for it over there?
I just want to say that I live in southern Dutchess County in Fishkill near Beacon, which has proliferated in housing. Beacon has gone up, out, and all around. And our town supervisor, Ozzy, is really trying to address this and not exclude people from the area. They want to take the past prison there and turn it into, I don't know how many housing units. Do you know that to go 2 miles now on 52, it takes me half an hour because there's one road in and one road out. So while I am all for what we're saying, there's a whole other layer to it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that answer is, but
public transit.
Grocery store
it's public transit.
Yeah, but where is that?
That's the question, right? Where is and back to our environmental, the fact that we are part of nature. I think all of this is tied with our reliance on fossil fuels, right? And without really addressing that issue, we can't. Can we really address any of these? I don't know.
So just going back to the big picture points that you made, I don't know if there's an answer, but the U.S. having the largest housing crisis in the world and and also being the country with the largest percentage of nonprofits per capita, when you talk about housing as a public good or a social good, and we're talking to all nonprofits here, mostly nonprofits here today, and the intersection with government. The question I have to ask is, what are we not doing in terms of government providing a way to make housing a social good again and allow it to be possible to build cooperatives and do the kinds of housing development that's available in Austria, Finland, Germany, Denmark, etc.
I mean, we don't have a ton of time to get into this, but maybe we can have a little debrief Zoom in the new year. But the one thing I'll say is that there has been massive investments in housing in the United States. Enormous, right? There was a huge investment in public housing in the mid-20th century, alongside a huge investment in highly subsidized mortgages for whites-only suburbs. And so, that federal investment, how are we going to get that kind of federal investment again to right the wrongs of history and also invest in housing as a human right? I don't know the answer to your question. But I know we haven't seen that level of investment in far too long.
And it was racist when they were investing in housing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That the FHA mortgages and. Hi, Kara. I think we're done. Thank you so much.